For our last example, we're going to take a look at C#'s if single selection statement. The example is called comparison, and you'll find it in the fig03_22 folder. So let me go ahead and open up that project. And before we take a look at the code, let's run the program just so we can see it in action. Now the program is expecting me to enter an integer value. And as I mentioned in the preceding program, when you type in the input, we're assuming that you provide a proper value and not checking the user input in any way. So let's say for argument's sake here that the user types hello rather than a numeric whole number value. When you do that, you see this long error message get displayed. You get this kind of disconcerting dialog box. This is a so-called exception that occurs at runtime. It's telling me the type of the exception that occurred and giving me an error message telling me that the input string was not in a correct format, and that's coming from the int types parse method that is trying to convert that string into a numeric value. This problem occurred in our main method of class comparison at line 13. So if I go ahead and click over here, you can see that line 13 is where we tried to use the parse method to convert that value. So it's giving me information about the problem that occurred. Now, in this case, I'm going to simply dismiss this and start over. In later lessons, we will show you how to deal with problems like the one that you just saw on the screen there. So let's run the program again, and this time I'll type a couple of values, and we can see that the program displays 3 lines of output after that, telling me that 10 is not equal to 20, 10 is less than 20, and 10 is less than or equal to 20. And if I run it one more time here, let's say I give 2 values that are identical, then you can see it gives me results accordingly. And finally, if I run it one more time, and this time provide a larger value first, you can see it gives me different results again, but depending on which comparisons result in a true comparison, we get different lines of output. So let's take a look at our comparison program. And as we have in the preceding examples, we have a class called comparison in this case, and a main method within that class. We prompt the user to enter the first integer, and then we read in a line of text and convert it to an integer value. So console.readLine once again gives me back a string. The string that it gives me back I pass immediately to the int types parse method, which converts that value, if it's in the correct format, into an integer value that I store in number 1. And notice the combination of the declaration of the variable and the initialization of the variable here in line 13. By the way, in C#, before you can use a variable, it must be initialized. Otherwise, you'll wind up with compilation errors. At line 16 and 17, we then prompt the user to enter a second integer, and we read that value in and convert it to an int. And then we have a series of if statements that demonstrate how to perform various comparisons. So here at line 19 through line 22, we have an if statement that starts with the keyword if, followed by a required set of parentheses containing an expression that evaluates to a so-called Boolean value, a value of type bool, B-O-O-L, in C#. So number 1 double equals number 2. This is the equality operator, and this returns true if the value of number 1 is the same as the value of number 2. And in that case, we will then output a line of text using a string interpolation expression in which we insert the values of number 1 and number 2 separated by a double equal sign. So only if the condition in the parentheses is true will line 21 execute. And that's why only when I entered 2 values that were the same, this particular line of output displayed. Now, the remaining if statements look the same other than the relational or equality operator that's being used. So this is the inequality operator, which is one of the 2 equality operators. And in this case, it is saying if number 1 is not equal to number 2, then we will display a corresponding line of text. And finally, for the last 4 if statements, as I scroll down here, we have a comparison to see if number 1 is less than number 2. a comparison to see if number 1 is greater than or number 2, and then finally for the last two, less than or equal and greater than or equal. And by the way, the symbols for the less than or equal and greater than or equal operators must not have spaces between the two characters that make up those operators.